Well, good afternoon, good evening, folks. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Seth Spencer. I'm the Teach Climate Network coordinator for Climate Generation, the host of this Climate Change Education Best Practices Workshop Series. I am thrilled that Julie Ackerman, an earth science educator in Minnesota, is with us tonight and able to share some of her experience and again, best practices about really getting youth excited and engaged in climate action. If this is the first time you have joined one of our workshop series, Climate Generation's mission is to ignite and sustain the ability of educators, youth, and communities to act on the systems that perpetuate the climate crisis. And we do this through three overarching visions, which was really to combat science disinformation, center anti-racism and systemic equity, and probably one of the most important is really localizing climate change action. Again, thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to our presenter. Julie, take it away.
All right. Again, thank you everyone for being here. The fact that you're here makes me think that you are passionate about climate change education, which I obviously, because it's kind of my thing, think that it's something that everyone should be concerned about. Okay, do we see it? Good. Okay. All right, so the title of this is No Interest, No Problem, Strategies to Engage Teens in Climate Action in Their Communities. I got involved in doing action projects several years ago, and actually it came through going to a teacher's workshop in Maine through the Climate Initiative. They have some great resources that I will share. It's very similar to Climate Generation. There's an abundance of resources that can help you through doing action projects. So just a little bit about me, so you know I'm qualified. I lived in Michigan for most of my life. I moved to Minnesota, southern Minnesota, about 10 years ago. I did attend Michigan State University, and I got my bachelor's in earth science and environmental science from there, and also my master's in curriculum and instruction with a science emphasis. I did go back to Johns Hopkins University about 4 years ago and got my master's in environmental science and policy with the climate change track, because that's what I was most interested in. I have been teaching earth science about 25 years. I teach a whole bunch of other things as well. I teach in a small district, so pretty much whatever they throw at me, I teach. One thing that I did want to mention is I've had this awesome opportunity to go to a small island in the Bahamas. I was trained by Terra Science and Education. They actually paid the way for me to get there. Actually, the cost of the trip was all included, except I'm pretty sure I had to pay for my own airfare, and my school picked that up. But anyway, they right now are looking for teachers to go next summer. So I told George, who is the master teacher, that I would put a link here. And if anyone is interested, you can go ahead and link there and sign up. He's going to be doing a short Zoom after Thanksgiving sometime. So if you want to hear more about that, go ahead and sign up and he'll contact you. I also have contributed to content through the Climate Initiative. I contributed to the Climate Change and Agriculture Learning Lab, and we'll talk more about learning labs in a couple minutes. So my goal here is to keep everything light and informal. I'm not going to ask you questions. I want you to be as active or inactive in this as you want. You don't have to tell us your name. You don't have to share your video or say anything the entire time. It's totally up to you how active you want to be. I want to give you some practical takeaways. So if you are ready to do action projects in your classrooms, you will be able to do it. and you'll have kind of a guide in order to get you there and have the confidence that you'll be able to do it. I don't want to put any fluff or filler in this. So I'm going to probably be sharing a whole bunch of stuff, but you'll have the link to this and you'll be able to go back and review some of the material. Some of the links that I'm going to share will all be there for you. I want you to be ready to act, like I said, and at the end, I will go ahead and leave some time so I can answer questions. My why came from this poster. This is a poster from HHMI, Howard Hughes Medical Institute. It's actually an interactive poster. If you go to the
I'll just go ahead and double check. Everybody's muted. Hold on a second.
And so if you click on that link there, when you get the presentation, it will take you to the HHMI page. They have a ton of wonderful resources that the kids are really get really interactive with and really enjoy. So I provide that link there. Anyway, I had this poster in my classroom, and about 5 years ago, I had a parent in there and we were talking, and she was kind of staring at it. And then she turned to me and said, "How can you even look at that?" And I said, "How can you not look at that?" And we had this discussion, and she was just saying how easy it was to kind of bury your head in the sand about climate change, because she just really felt like we had already gone too far and everything was hopeless. And at that time, that night, I decided that I was going to do something in addition to being a classroom teacher, because I felt the need um, to kind of spread the word that it's not hopeless and we can make a big impact as long as we're educating our population and the world actually globally and getting them involved. Okay, so the first thing I want to do here is I have a link to a Google Earth page. And so just to kind of center everybody and allow everybody to know where we're coming from, if you would like to add your location to that link, once you click on the project page, you can type your location into the search bar. And then Google Earth is going to zoom you into your location. If you save to the project and then update it, you'll get a pop-up where you can type your name into the description and or any contact information. And my idea here was, if you are in a region that is experiencing wildfires and you want to center your action research around wildfires, there might be other people that are in those same regions, even if they're in another, country, that you could contact. So again, this is up to you on whether you want to even share your name or your contact information, but it'd be nice to know where everyone's coming from. So even if you don't want to share your name, maybe just pull up your location and, I don't know, put in your favorite musician or TV personality, and we'll know that you just want to stay anonymous. So I'm going to open that up and see where we're coming from. I, again, am in southern Minnesota. Right, so. And if you want to do that, I'm going to actually put, I'll put the instructions back up on the screen. So I just really want this to be a resource for others. And if you, one of the things that I'll talk about in a little bit is collaborating with people who are kind of in the same impact region as you, and not by locality, but again, by whatever is affecting your community the most. Here in southern Minnesota, we are an agricultural community. Our entire community is built on agriculture, primarily soybeans and corn. And so that is kind of like what hits my kids the best when we start talking about changes to the environment and changes to the yields. But obviously, if you live on the coast somewhere, you're going to want to focus more on sea level rise. If you're in the Southwest, probably a drought situation you'd want to focus in on. So yeah, that Google Earth project page, if you want to add to that, I'm just going to leave it up there and you can always come back to it. That link will be there for you when you get the presentation at the end of this. I also have a link here that is biggest impacts for your community, for your county, pardon me. That will take you to a link where it will give you a whole bunch of information about how your county is being impacted by climate change. So in case you aren't sure really what you should be focusing in on, you can bring up that page, type in your county, and it will give a score from 0 to 10 on several different issues like heat, the humidity and heat combination, impacts to agriculture, wildfires, impacts to your economy. And so it's just a really good resource to know kind of how your county is being impacted. And it's also good for the kids to explore that because they might not see how impactful climate change might be, say, on the economy in their region. But if they see like a score of 8 out of 10, that means it's probably going to have a pretty substantial impact on the economy of their community. Okay, so I have done 3 main action projects. I put this quote here: every new batch of students is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get, but there's always a chance for something sweet. In fact, I had 3 different, entirely different classes that I did action projects with. My first class was a senior ecology class, and they chose to be there. They were already interested in the environment and environmentalism. So they were kind of like my dream students. I did with them, I did a little bit of the learning lab through TCI on invasive species. My 8th grade Explore class was basically a class of unmotivated kids who did not choose to be there. It's an hour opposite music. And so it's usually a lot of boys. And this particular year, I think like the boys in my class were failing, like 80% of them were failing all their classes, just highly unmotivated, a lot of absenteeism with that group. And so they were pretty uncooperative at the beginning. So that's kind of a word I would use to describe them. And I did use pieces of the renewable energy learning lab with them before we did the action project. And my senior, the 3rd action project I did was it was data, dirt, and drones. We're trying to get into drones and teaching kids how to fly drones, et cetera. But I did focus mostly on dirt and data. Most of them were boys, and most of them were from farming families and will probably inherit the family farm at some point or worked for farms. And they came in thinking that they kind of knew everything, and they were very conservative in their views. And they were pretty adamant that conventional farming was the only way that farmers can make money. And so I kind of had a lot to dig through on them. And that was probably my most frustrating group because they were very stubborn and pig-headed to begin with. But at the end, that was the action project that I think was the most valuable for sure. So my first one with ecology, again, these were kids that wanted to be there. They researched different ways in which the climate of our local community has changed over time. I did put a link there to a good resource where you could get climate data if you're unsure where to get it. They used that data to form questions that they wanted to ask some of the elderly people in the community. Basically, the point was to see if the citizens that have lived here for a long time would validate the data that they had found. And so they formulated their questions and they ended up hosting a coffee talk. And I want to just show you a little clip from that, that it was a great experience. And the people certainly validated all of the data that the kids had got, but just hearing the stories was an entirely, it brought everything to a new level. So I'm going to go ahead and share this. This was after one of the kids asked a question about how the waterways had been affected over time.
Yeah, oh, in 1965, my college advisor, Dr. Chelberg, did a survey of clams and mussels in all the streams and the lakes around southern Minnesota. And I went with him sometimes and it was amazing, the bucket loads of different kinds of mussels. In 1988, at the Huntley Bridge, it was a drought year. The water was this deep and the mussels were swimming or crawling through the sand everywhere. A couple of years ago, we had a drought year. I went back, there were zero mussels left in the Blue Earth River.
Try to get back to my page here. Okay. And so that was just a really good kind of story referenced validation of the data that the kids had collected. And the kids didn't share any of the data whatsoever with the participants in the coffee talk. And we didn't say anything about climate change. Actually, the kids decided to call it, I think they called it change, the stories of change. And so it was about how our community was changing over time. But they knew that probably some of the people that they invited would not come if they titled it anything to do with climate change. So they didn't say anything about climate change. Some lessons that I learned in that first experience was to have the students do everything that needs to be done. They kind of own the project and they took over. And that has been a theme in all three of my action projects. If I gave the kids the freedom to kind of choose what they wanted to do and take it on, they really stepped up to the plate. So they set up the venue. They asked the egg building here in town if we could use one of their rooms, and they let us without it costing anything. They let us do it for free. The kids made the invitations through Canva. They sent the invitations. They had discussed who in the community they wanted to invite, and they made sure that there was a variety of people there. They prepared the venue on the day of the coffee talk. They got all the snacks and coffee ready. They sent reminders before the fact. They cleaned it up. They made thank you notes and they sent the thank you notes. So they pretty much did everything. One thing also I learned is don't wait until the end of the time with your students to institute the project. That was a concern of mine because I had we had scheduled the coffee talk the Wednesday before the quarter was ending or the semester was ending. And I had not considered that we might have a weather day that day. And it was in mid-January. So what happened was it was about -34 on the day of the coffee talk. And first off, we were concerned that school was going to be canceled. Thankfully, it was not canceled. But then we were concerned that these people wouldn't show up because, again, most of them were elderly people from our community. And there was not one participant that did not show up that day. I was super surprised, but they were so excited to be invited and for their stories to be told that there was no way that they were going to miss it. I did learn that lesson though. So subsequently, I've made sure that I don't kind of wait till the very end, just in case something pops up. And it actually did happen with my third project. I learned that the community will absolutely respond positively. I learned that the students will become super involved if you give them the freedom to own the action project and to not worry about the results. I had a little bit of fear that what the participants would tell the kids would disagree with the data that they had collected, and I wasn't sure how I was going to handle that. But everything that they said validated the data, and it was just a great learning opportunity. The kids actually ended up staying. We were supposed to be done at the end of the school day at like 3, and it went way over because they wanted to keep talking and the kids didn't want to leave. So it was a great experience. The next one was with my 8th graders who, again, highly unmotivated, absenteeism problems, mostly just failing their classes. Basically, with this group, it was kind of like the administration said, just make sure that they don't come to the office, make sure they're not a behavior problem. And so I just said, well, I can kind of do whatever I want then. It's an exploratory class. And I did use the Renewable Energy Learning Lab as a focus to begin that quarter with. And after we got done with some of the renewable energy activities, they were given the choice to do an action project. They had to pick the action project that they wanted to do. They ended up choosing worm composting. They researched it. They decided that they could do some composting in the school. They talked to the administration, the kitchen staff, custodians. They got permission to run the project. They had to research and determine the best way to build some compost bins at a fairly economical cost. And then they ended up running the project for the remainder of the year. And these kids, once they were given the choice of the action project, there was really no going back for them. I had no behavior problems. They were engaged every day. They saw sense in what they were doing. And so they didn't really even understand what they were learning at the time. There was times where they had to have the meter sticks out because they were building the project and they had to take measurements, and they didn't even really know that they were doing math at the time. They were just doing what they had to do to, get their action project done. So I did learn with the younger students that it's important that you kind of narrow it down for them in a way where they're still choosing. So like one of the things that they had suggested was we should get the whole school to go with solar and get solar panels. And so I let that, be one of their choices. And then at the very end, we talked about what might make the most impact for the school community and what was going to be doable. And so they did decide, like some of those other things that they thought of, yeah, it would be great to have the school, get solar panels. But the resources of the school and everything, all the blockages for that, they decided it probably wasn't the best choice. So they did choose the vermiculture. I learned that I could give the kids, as long as I allowed them to show up and have the freedom, they would absolutely do what they needed to do. I learned to think about the longevity of the project. I hadn't even considered what to do with the worms at the end of the school year. So that became an issue. I ended up taking the worms home and I put all the compost and the worms in my garden. And it was the best garden I've ever had. I ended up having all of these pumpkins that I brought back to school in the fall, and we, the kids and I decorated them and we painted them, and so it was good for them to see kind of the results of what they had done. I also learned to do pre and post survey during this time. This is, I asked the kids 3 questions. These are my 8th graders at the beginning of the quarter. And one of the questions I asked was, I think that Minnesota is being impacted by climate change. 6% of them at the beginning thought that that was probably true. And by the time we were done, 91% of them said that they understood that to be true. Another question was, I think that I can personally do something about climate change. 12% of them at the beginning thought that that would be an option. And by the end, 87% of them thought that they could personally do something. And then the last one, I think some groups of people, like those considered poor or those of minority, are more impacted by climate change. 9% of them at the beginning thought that to be true. And then by the end, 87% of them thought that that was true. So those numbers were astounding to me. I knew that kids liked the action project, but I didn't realize how much they were learning along the way. I learned to be prepared for it to be a little messy. My classroom was a little bit up in arms for a while when we were building the composting. We had power tools and the supplies were kind of in a corner. And I just I just let it be because the kids were responding so well to it that I knew it was making a difference. So I have this short little clip of one of the days that we were working on the project. And this was another really good validation for me.
Julie, can you just double check that you're still screen sharing? It went away from me for a second.
It says that I'm screen sharing.
Okay, it might just be for me then.
Okay.
This is the only reason I like school now.
So I'm not sure if you heard, but that boy said, this is the only reason I like school now. And that boy was huge. I mean, if he showed up to school 1 or 2 days a week, it was a bonus. And when we were doing that, he was showing up to school every day. So yeah, that was a great validation for me as well. And I learned to take pictures and record videos because I did not do that with my first action project. I didn't do a lot of that. And so with this one, I wanted to make sure I did that. So am I screen sharing? Do I need to do something, Seth, or?
I think the comments were that folks can still see it, so you should be good. I'm just adjusting things on my end. Thank you.
Oh, perfect, thanks. And then my last action project, which was my very favorite, also the one that I struggled with entirely more than either two, even my 8th graders, was this group of primarily senior boys. There were 2 girls in the class that had not chose the class, but they were there just because nothing else fit in their schedule. So primarily it was boys that chose the class because they were from farming families. And this was a lengthy process for me because they, for the most part, didn't even believe that climate change was happening, and they certainly didn't want to admit that humans were causing a change in the climate. So I came about this just from a data standpoint. Um, and we were just researching what was good for the soil and what would help crop yields. And then it led into weather and how yields have been affected over time by weather. And they started to see that our yields are definitely being impacted by climate change. That did take a while to establish, and it did take a lot of kind of digging into data, which thankfully these were seniors. They were totally able to do that. And they were coming to the realization on their own, which is what I wanted. I knew that if I told them, look, we need to be concerned because your farms are going to go under or whatever, there was no way that they were going to listen to me. So after all the data, they decided that they were going to hold a community event on regenerative farming. They became experts on the different advantages of regenerative farming in their groups. They collected a bunch of data on their topic. One of the examples I have here, this was from the group that uh, was about benefiting our farmers. So they talked about how even though yields might be down, the output costs were a lot less. So they talked about how you ended up making more money. Um, they talked about how the soil had improved so much over time and all the other benefits to the actual farmers. There was a group on uh, impacting the health of people, waterways, all kinds of different topics that they had explored. They made Canva posters, two of which I do have on the page there. Um, and then they set up a community showing at the Chamber of Commerce, and they had the community come in and talk through their posters. They also created a video that focused on the topics that they had researched. I'm going to play just a little tad bit of that video because it's like 4 minutes long. I think it's probably a little bit longer than it should have been, but I didn't want to cut anything out for their sake. Um, but I thought that they did an extremely good job with both their Canva presentations and the video. I'm not I'm not gonna say it wasn't challenging. When they first, started on their Canvas, I knew that I was gonna have to get, I was gonna have to give a lot of feedback. They were seniors, they had senioritis, and they were kinda like, "Oh, this is good," and I was like, we still got time," and they each went through so many different variations, and they just kept improving on their Canvas. And they by the end were super proud of them and super proud to share them. So let me go ahead and just play a little snippet of this video that they
Climate
had
change is
created.
manifesting its effects globally. All regions are being impacted in their own unique ways. Here in southern Minnesota, our attention is directed toward the vital land that sustains our rural communities. Agriculture serves as the cornerstone of our community, underscoring the need to ensure that farmers can sustain the health of their soil. Embracing regenerative practices emerges as a crucial avenue for achieving this goal. More than 20 great civilizations have collapsed, in good part due to their lack of care for their soil. Whether it was extensive deforestation, massive amounts of soil erosion, over-intensive agriculture, or lack of conservation practices, the end result was the same: the inability to feed their people.
Yeah, so that's just a little snippet of it. And again, I will make sure, well, that link is already in the presentation. So you can go back and watch that at your convenience if you would like. Um, Some lessons I learned with this one was let the data talk. It was all about them exploring the data. They were genuinely concerned about how the yields were being affected after they got into it. So I just let them take that over. They chose the regenerative farming as their action project. Also, I asked, or they ended up asking experts in. And one that was super helpful was Nate Carr, who was from our local soil and water conservation district. He works for the district, but is also a farmer, and he's from a farming family. He gave us some input on how regenerative practices were turning around his field as compared to his dad's fields, which were literally right across the street. His dad doing entirely conventional farming, and him doing some regenerative practices. And so the kids held him in high regards and really believed what he was saying. So he was a great resource to have. I also learned to advertise our project. We did do some marketing on it. We used our school website and Instagram, and they put flyers out around town. That way we knew that we were going to get people, and we knew that the word was out. They had also called the local paper, and the local paper came in during the community conversation, and the paper did a little article in the next issue about what the kids were doing. And also make sure that you ask the community for funding or any help that you need. I, through all three projects, was super astounded by how my community responded. If you put the kids in front of it, people will not say no. Let them go, let them ask. And the community, the businesses, like the Chamber of Commerce, everyone that we asked to do things and provide some funding for, we didn't get turned down. So it ended up being a super awesome experience in all realms of it. One thing that was helpful, I had learned from my first project to not wait till the very end. Our first community conversation actually had to be rescheduled because it was in January and we ended up having a snowstorm. We didn't have school on the day that we had originally planned the conversation. So we had to go back, reschedule it, remarket it, re-put it out there. So I was glad that I had learned that lesson, not to wait till the very end, because it wouldn't have worked for us. We would have ran out of time. And always leave a couple days to debrief and make sure you can talk through all of the things that the kids had learned and answer any questions that they had from the experience. So let's see, we got a couple more minutes. I probably won't get into taking you to the Climate Initiative's website, but here are some of the learning labs. These are the learning labs that they offer. And every learning lab will have resources for you to teach the content and to do an action project. They also have case studies that the kids like. They have a virtual classroom that the kids can go in, and there's different interactive things. So that's a super good resource. One great thing about the Climate Initiative, it's also a nonprofit organization, just like Climate Generation, but they really focus on three lenses: the environmental aspect of climate change in our communities, the economic impacts, and then the social impacts. And I find that to be really helpful because kids will often kind of focus in on one thing, but they point out throughout the lessons that it's all connected. And so, for instance, our environment here in southern Minnesota is being impacted, but certainly our economy is being impacted. And then if you think about, if our economy is impacted to the point where we don't have the farms to sustain a community, the farmers aren't going to be there anymore. In all of our social, the cultures that come from farming and farm families and what comes up through the generations, that's going to be lost as well. And those three lenses are great things to focus on, and the Climate Initiative does a really good job at that. So above all, I would just suggest that you communicate the right message to your kids. Always keep it hopeful from day one. The kids will always come in just kind of burnt out, and they're tired of hearing about climate change, and they feel like it is an insurmountable problem that they're not going to be able to do anything about. So just from day one, keep it hopeful. Make sure that they know that there are things that can be done. Make sure there's no blaming going on, because I feel like from the beginning, especially with my senior boys class, they felt like they were being blamed by the community, because as farmers, we know that they're using pesticides on their field. We know that there's erosion happening, but it's a complicated issue. We can't just say, okay, you guys, you're not going to farm anymore, because then how are we going to feed our people? So just knowing that there's really no blame in it, and also knowing that they are not the generation that has to solve the problem, just not putting that on their shoulders because it's too much for them. Just to let them know it's a issue of humanity, and humanity as a whole has to be involved in solving it. Leave room for feelings. There's going to be a lot of feelings involved, especially on my senior class with the dirt and data. The two girls, they became extremely emotional over some of the things that they were hearing. And you just have to make sure that there's time to work through those feelings and put a positive spin on it all. And then just be real with the kids. They'll know if you're not being real. When we were talking about regenerative farming with that senior class, a lot of the reading was also having hoofed animals on your farmland. I knew that that is not something that our farmers are going to be doing right now. It's too large scale of an operation for them. And so when the kids said, that's not even possible, I said, yeah, it's not. Let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the things that we can do, like um, uh, doing different types of tilling or no-till, and getting different species in there, ground covers in the off season, and just the things that can be done. Okay, that was a lot in a little amount of time, but I did want to leave some time in case there was any questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Julie. We really appreciate you sharing your experience and the projects that these amazing students were able to do. Yeah, we're going to definitely open it up for questions here. I will do a quick follow-up in a couple minutes just about our next workshop on December 12th. But as you may have seen in the chat, we will definitely be sending a follow-up email with the recording, the slides, and any additional resources. And I'll open it up for any questions. And Julie, I don't know if you can see the chat, but I can definitely read the chat questions out loud if that's helpful.
Well, I can get it up here.
Yeah.
Here. All right.
And I might just try to bring one up because it quickly disappeared. But Johanna had a question that I'll repost. Ever experienced pushback from parents in the community, and how do you handle like grading these types of projects?
Okay, so for pushback in the community, I have not. And I think that's primarily just if you frame it according to your audience and who you're going to be talking to, you won't have those type of problems, because we know that we're dealing with climate change in our community. We know that the springs are flooding. This year we had like 6 weeks of water or of summer without substantial precipitation, which entirely affected the crops. So I find not saying anything about global warming or climate change in a conservative community is probably the best practice, because you don't need to say that as long as they understand that things are changing and we can do something about it. That's what's most important. And as far as grading goes, a lot of the grading was on classroom contribution and their participation. And I did grade them on their data collection and being able to analyze the data, their Canvas, the data that they put on their Canvas, and then each of the groups wrote, and this is for the senior project, the last one I did, wrote a portion, a script for the video on their what they were experts in, and so I also graded them on that. I see one thing about funding. What were they asking for funding for? Um, just like as getting the coffee, getting the snacks, for the worm composting, it wasn't expensive. There was like a couple bins from the Dollar General and hardly a lot of things that we could just get from school, but you will have some cost, and I just would encourage you to seek that from the community. I know a lot of the times teachers will just go and get things by themselves and not know that people are so interested in helping, but I've learned definitely people are interested in helping.
You may see a question that asks, how long were these projects over? Was this a semester, year long?
My ecology class and the dirt and data class were semester classes. The 8th grade class was a quarter class. And so this wasn't all we did. I put it in with other things. And what it became was kind of like the ending of the class. And so we learned a whole bunch of stuff. We collected data. We have a school farm field. So with my senior class, we went out to the field and we did different experiments and stuff. But this was kind of like the accumulation in all 3 of the classes. So I just kind of work it in wherever I can. In ecology, I thought, well, let's do something. I got these kids and we have some time. Let's figure something out. And that's basically what I do in any of the classes that I can work it into.
I'm not sure if somebody was coming off mute to ask a question, but I saw another one that was sort of like, how did you be flexible on the interests of the students while trying to still frame it within the focus of the class or the subject?
Yeah, that's one thing I didn't mention, just because I feel like we all know that we need to know our students before we can teach them well. As educators, we know that. So just if you know your students and you know their interests and you know what they're good at, you can frame it all around that. So I knew that 8th grade boys class, they didn't want to do anything with art. They didn't want to do anything that required a lot of writing or, you know, going through a bunch of data on their own. I knew that they had to have a hands-on thing that they could own because I knew the boys. With my ecology class, there were some kids in there, a couple of girls that were so artistic, and they took control of designing like the invitations and the thank yous. So just knowing who the kids are and having them know each other and what their talents are and what their interests are is a really good place to start. So I always take time if I have a new class. I used to not take the time to do these activities where you get to know each other because it's a small school, and I always thought, well, we kind of all know each other anyway. But it is super important for everyone to kind of know where everyone else is coming from, and again, know the talents and the interests. So you know, and they know what they're each going to be good at.
Wonderful. Another question, because we know every school district, every state is a little different with this, but were you tied to curricular standards? And if so, how did you make them align with the projects?
So that was my biggest concern the first time that I went to the Climate Initiatives teacher workshop, because I kept thinking, well, I got all the stuff to teach. You know, I'm thinking about my earth science class where I am bound to these standards. And at that time, we didn't have NGSS and we didn't have a lot of climate standards. So I fit it in with earth resources. There's always a place to fit it in. And what I found is it's so valuable that I would rather spend time doing the action projects and then not get to some of the things that I was supposed to get to, because it's worth it and the kids will learn from it and the community will learn from it. And it's exactly what we should be doing with kids. Um, the neither three of the classes that I talked about were I wasn't really bound to standards. It was kind of like do what you think. My earth science class is entirely different. I teach ninth grade earth science now. This is the first year that I'm teaching with the new standards, which are very climate change dependent. So I will absolutely be able to hit a ton of standards with the action projects that we'll be doing. And if you have NGSS in your school, there's a ton of climate change in the standards.
Julia, one question I had is you talked about how did you maybe react to any pushback within the community, but how did you get so many school members involved in a project that it can be a little challenging to incorporate the facility staff and the lunchroom staff and all of this?
Honestly, we just did it. I just didn't concern myself with worrying about being told no. I thought, well, if we're told no, then we're told no, and we'll just do something else. And I will say that the custodians probably were the most concerned to begin with. But we assured them that if it began to be any more work for them, then we would stop doing it. And they let us, and it was never an issue. It was never an issue. And thankfully, I have supportive administration, and the teachers were supportive, and the kids, you know, they learned how to, you know, when they went to dump their trays, what could go in the composting bins and what not, what couldn't. So it was a really good learning lesson, not necessarily for our community, but for our school community with that 8th grade class.
Wonderful. Any other questions before we wrap up tonight's workshop? I don't know if you can see the question, but how many students do you generally have in those three classes?
Oh, it's different. I think probably the ecology class was about 23 kids. The 8th grade class was probably about 18 kids. And the dirt and data class was probably about 23 kids. And one of the things that I was always concerned about before I began is keeping everyone busy. And there were times where kids weren't busy. They weren't busy the entire time, but there was enough for them to do. And they were invested enough where even if they were done maybe doing what they had to do for the day, they were still looking up data and asking questions.
Well, Julie, thank you so much again for sharing your experience with us. I am going to go ahead and put in the chat just our next workshop on Thursday, December 12th, which is green jobs and green skills. What are they and how can I help my students get some? As I've mentioned many times tonight, I will make sure to send out the recording, the slides that Julie shared tonight, and any additional resources that were shared. And overall, thank you everybody for spending this hour with us. And I hope you have a great rest of the day and week.
Thanks for having me, everybody. Have a great night. And if you need any help, my contact information is on the presentation.